Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Jack Butler. I'm here with Clayton Olson. We are live, or thanks if you're watching us after the event. This video is no more breadcrumbing and ghosting in 2023. We're excited to get into this. And Clayton, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, man. Juicy topic, as always. I know that you tend to make a lot of insightful content around this, so I'm curious to see what we unpack together.
Yeah, totally. If you are here joining us live, drop us a hello. We will be taking a few questions possibly later, so get your questions here in the comments. So I like talking about this partly because it seems to have gotten a lot of resonance when I put this sort of content out on my channel. So I know that people struggle with this, and I thought it might be useful. I know that you're really good at dissecting things, making distinctions for people that might be empowering. So my aim with this video is to help people feel more empowered in this area, possibly taking their power back from the experience of being breadcrumbed or ghosting. But I wanted to start off with just a little bit of like definitional stuff.
I love it. Yeah.
Like, what is this, right? And so I'm going to sort of put it over to you. You don't have to get this right. No one in a sense has got the sort of linguistic authority to say exactly what this is or isn't, but I thought it might be useful to try and dimensionalize that a little bit for people. So yeah, when you hear ghosting, what do you think the definition of that is, and where are the edges of that? When is it ghosting? When is it not ghosting? Any thoughts?
Okay, so I think that's a really good question, and I think maybe today we can explore some of these edges a little bit, but for sake of just kind of landing the meat and potatoes in this dialogue, let's say that ghosting refers to any act of abruptly cutting somebody off, cutting off all communication with someone you're dating or that you've been in a relationship with without any explanation or warning. This can typically happen after a few dates. This can happen in a relationship. And typically ghosting is also followed by, and I think that's a really important caveat, is if you're reaching out to the person, they're ignoring your calls. They're not getting back to you. And they're not offering any explanation. Now, if you have not reached out to them and you think that they're ghosting you because you haven't heard from them, but you haven't reached out to them, you might be ghosting them.
Right.
So I just put that over the table that I think that there's this is where we can really get clear of like, okay, I'm reaching out. I'm not hearing anything back. This doesn't make any sense. I would say that falls into the realm of ghosting.
Yeah. So I like that. So the words that I heard you say, there were 1, abrupt, and 2, no explanation, and 3, that you've possibly made contact maybe more than once and it hasn't been acknowledged, returned. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I know from personal experience, I know from working with lots of people in this territory that this can be an incredibly painful experience.
Oh yeah.
So do you have any counsel for someone who is in this territory or thinks they may be in this territory or has recently been in this territory? How many times would you imagine reaching out to someone before you concluded, okay, I'm not getting anything back here, and I want to actually not put any more, energy and attention over here? Would you be encouraging people to send a sort of a farewell message? Would you just say, leave it and sort of complain to your therapist, so to speak? What's your view of that? Well, because that can obviously add to the pain, right? If you go to say goodbye to get closure, but then you get ghosted, it's like, compounding the issue.
Yeah. So I think it's very context dependent. And I think it really depends on how long have you been in relationship with this person? What is the nature of the emotions been? Have there been some type of shared agreement in reality? Does the person ghosting, is it bringing up a real level of concern, like for that person's well-being and safety? Right? Like suddenly just disappear. That's a different level of ghosting compared to, say, you've gone on 3 dates, 4 dates with somebody, you haven't been intimate with them, and suddenly you don't hear from them anymore. And so I think it really depends on the context. And I'd say my intuition says in these kind of scenarios, maybe 2, maybe 3 reach outs. And whatever the final one is, and I mean, 3 might be pushing it. 3 might be a lot there, depending on where you're at in this phase. But I think the final one is less about them trying to get a response back from them and more about you doing
Yes.
what you need to do, saying what you need to say to create closure for yourself. Because I get it. When someone is not an active participant in the closing of a relationship, that is painful. There's no way around that. And
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to be standing in this position saying like, hey, you know, you creating closure is 100% your responsibility, and you should be able to completely do it on your own. I think there's a line of a thought that that's a very empowering perspective to be in. And then I think the reality of it is
Yeah.
that, you know, we
We're
want,
human. We're
yeah,
deeply
we're
sensitive.
human beings, exactly, and we get intertwined with people, and so I think we stand in that perspective to the best of our ability to do what we can with with what's in front of us to create closure, and the communication is around that. Is, I think, speaking into the space. What is it that you need to say that so that you can close this connection down and walk away with it with a sense of self-respect, dignity, and maybe honoring for the good of what happened and being able to complete this chapter and move on.
Yeah. I
What do you
like that.
think about that? Yeah.
I love that. So you're saying in effect that in that last message, it's actually if you're doing it for you and not actually for them. You're also acknowledging that what you're attempting is hard, and there's maybe no way to avoid some level of pain.
Yeah.
I can even just think of an experience I had back in the day that it wasn't a ghosting in the abrupt, unexplained way, but sort of more of like an obvious drop off from the other person, but without much specificity. So sort of like, yeah, I don't think we're really compatible, but I can't really name anything specific about that. We just have lots of quote incompatibilities, which may have been true, certainly in her experience. But just noticing that it did make it hard for me to feel like, oh, I can just kind of close down on this. There was nothing to really like sink my teeth into. And because of the slow fade, it was sort of like, well, are we sort of still in touch? Are we kind of not? And I'd even had these experiences where part of me would still almost like, oh, did I just see her over there in the marketplace? Like there was something in my system that was still kind of hanging on to this. So it gives me a lot of compassion, because that wasn't like the deepest connection for sure.
Yeah,
and
right.
have a certain kind of impact. So
Yeah.
I just want to say a quick hello. We've got Gina, Adren, Hannah, and Tara joining us here. Hello. It's cool. We've got all from all over across the world. We've got London, Oz, Warsaw, Michigan. Please say hello if you're joining us. If you're watching us live, or if you're here after the session, leave us a comment. I will get to all the comments. I'm talking with Clayton Olson. Clayton is a transformational coach, and we are in the topic of no more breadcrumbing and ghosting in 2023. So question for you, Clayton. Do you think this is on the rise? Because there's lots of things that we hear a lot more about, right? And I think there can be this assumption, well, if we're hearing more about something, it's because it's more prevalent, right? That would be an easy assumption to make. And then there's also this thing called awareness, right? So the more aware we are of things, the more we track them, the more we name them, right? So we might hear more talk of anxious attachment than we did 5 or 10 years ago. That doesn't necessarily mean there's more anxious attachment. It might just be that we've got a lot more awareness around it, right? Just like, back in the day, we didn't talk about, climate change, and now we all talk about climate change because we've got kind of more awareness of it. So, and there's been a huge change in the kind of dating landscape, from internet dating through apps. And I'm imagining that there's more of this sort of, is it going somewhere? Is it not, just drop off, unmatched, ghosted. But I'm just curious if you have a sense of that. You've been in this territory working with people for, a good kind of best part of a decade here. So what's your sense of that?
I think it's a combination of both. I think one, we're starting to put language to things that give people an aha moment, right? Where it's like, oh, wow, now I have something to explain what actually happened.
Yeah.
And my nervous system can relax because I don't feel so alone in it. This is an actual phenomena that happens in dating.
Yeah.
And, right. We can label it. We can understand it. We can get some distance and some objectivity to it. So I think there is that, right? That we have language for it. And so we're naturally going to be talking about it a little bit more. But I do also think that the environment is supporting more of this to occur as well, because I think on one level, with all the ways in which people can access self-development and the different communication models that are out there, one might think, okay, well, now people can maybe show up and have more honest conversations and step into the discomfort.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what I think is happening is I think that people are, one, experiencing so many options with the online dating
Yeah.
that we start valuing these personal connections a little bit less if we don't feel compatibility or
Yeah.
something isn't necessarily up to par where we want it to be. And I think we feel more, I think people in general feel a little bit more enabled to let go of something and treat it more carelessly with less respect because of all of the options that we have. And I also think too that, like, you know, this kind of communication around where someone is at in their relationship and within, in terms of like what they're able to give and what are non-negotiables. I just think that these conversations are a little bit more difficult. And I unfortunately don't think that the majority of people are getting better at communicating interpersonally. I think that they might actually be getting, there might be a deterioration that's happening because of just all the ways in which people are glued to their phones and interacting via text message anonymously, not having phone calls, but rather using these kind of lower forms of communication that don't require the same level of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I think to really have conversations around, I mean, what this really is about is expectations. And I would think what really breadcrumbing is about, whether someone's breadcrumbing or not, it's about congruence, right? Is, you know, if someone does not have the capacity for a committed partnership right now, and they're communicating that, and that they want to keep things casual, someone else might call that breadcrumbing behavior. But if that person's being honest about it, that's just how they're showing up to relationship right now. And if you're not listening to that's where they're at in their life, then you're breadcrumbing yourself, right? You're breadcrumbing yourself by hanging around in a connection that you're actually compatible with. And so I think that it really takes, we have to listen to what people are saying. And I think that just in general, we have to be more honest with where we're actually at, so that we can start to avoid falling into these labels that seem really like manipulative and malicious. Like, I ghosted someone, or I got ghosted, or this person's breadcrumbing me. And if we just had more honesty and more congruency around how we operated, I don't think that this would be such a big phenomena.
Yeah. Well, I like that you're taking a stand for that, you know, and you're also maybe acknowledging sort of two things. You're putting the possibility of how it could be better, whilst you're also saying perhaps people are getting worse at certain kinds of communication. Obviously, because there's not the social cost in the background, right? Like, if, you know, if I think of like the generations that grew up, you know, I grew up in a rural village in England, right, where people in my family had lived there for more than one generation. And so, you know, if you're meeting someone down the local pub and there's only one pub, you're probably not just going to suddenly not talk to someone, because you're going to be bumping into them again and again and again, right? So there's like a high social cost to that that's probably not worth it. Even if you're no longer going to be, you know, particularly communicative, you might have some minimum, you know, low acknowledgement. You still are a person. I'm a person, you know.
Wow.
Now we've gone so far from that. You know, the other analogy I sometimes think about, you know, I don't know how it was for you, because maybe America was a bit further along in this, but when I grew up, you know, we had 4 TV channels, right? And we got excited when there was a 5th one added, Channel 5 in the UK. So pretty much any night, there's only like 1 of 4 or 5 things that someone could be watching, unless you've like gone to Blockbuster and bought a video, but that was kind of expensive. So we didn't do that very often. So basically pretty much everyone is in the same kind of, you know, it's like if you're watching TV, you're either watching like, you know, the football, or you're watching like, you know, some Australian soap, or there's like a British soap, and that's kind of it. Now, you know, you go on, you know, it's not just Netflix or Prime or Hulu or Peacock or whatever channel. Within them, you know, within Prime, there's like, you know, infinite channels, right? So my loyalty to like my Prime, you know, Cinemax subscription is pretty low, right? And I think there's a sort of similar thing here, where people are kind of, you know, dating or seeking connection in so many multiple channels. It might be that they might not be on the channel any longer that you've been communicating with them in. Right. So it might not be super specific to you. It might be that they've just, you know, I've had people before say things like, oh, I've just checked out of this dating app because I got completely overwhelmed by Hinge. So I just suddenly got off it. But it wouldn't necessarily mean that when they got off it, they went down every open connection and said, hey, I'm leaving the app. I'm leaving the app. I'm leaving the app. Right. So, yeah, there's a lot of sort of uncodified territory combined with kind of misery of choice and low attention spans. And I think that is having an impact. I want to pick up
really quick. I really like your distinction though about that there is a lower social cost to breadcrumbing and ghosting these days, which may be a product of the fact that you can now reach so far out of your immediate social circle to find a possible partner, right? Into places where you would never go visit. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, we're not going to intersect anywhere. So like, am I going to lean in and have this really difficult conversation that I think is going to hurt this person's feelings even more? Or am I just going to hope that they get the point and we just kind of separate? And now that's talking to it in a more like kind of recent dating scenario versus like you establish relationship with them. But when you put those two things, I think that people are creatures of comfort and kind of go to the path of least resistance. And I think that's what we're seeing with these phenomena.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, just to not just to devil's advocate, but to give a different perspective, right? So when you're saying about, wouldn't it be, in a sense, it would be better if people had, courage, congruence, and could just sort of name like, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm available for, sort of take it or leave it, or I'm wanting to downshift the connection because, I notice I'm no longer into it, or I'm dating elsewhere, or I'm not dating, or whatever the story is. So then in a way that's, bringing much more truth, right, into personal truth into the conversation. And that would work well for someone who also prioritizes that in their value set, right, where they are sort of a truth first person. But a lot of people are harmony before truth, whether they're conscious of that or not. And so, I've also been with lots of clients who have been honest in that situation, and they don't get the thumbs back of like, hey, thanks so much just for telling me, good luck, appreciate it. Some of them get that. But about half or more of the time, the person just like unmatches them, or there's no like, in a sense, there's maybe some behavior back that's not particularly pro-social, right? Either just ignored, unmatched, but not something that's like, hey, got it, thanks. So I'm also just putting that in the picture because at least half the time people aren't being incentivized, I think, to do the thing that you're saying might be the better way of proceeding. And I kind of agree with you. Yeah.
And I think that you're bringing up a really good point. Because at some point in this conversation, whether it's a deep dive into this or just we kind of touch on it, but I think it's really important to whatever experience you're having in your life, if it's happening again and again and you're the common denominator of it, to ask the question, how am I creating breadcrumbers? How am I creating people ghosting me? And I think that's a really important inquiry to ask. And it talks specifically to what you're saying here, is that if there's a way that you're showing up in the connection where you are adversary or judgmental, or say you're already crossing boundaries, or maybe you're moving too fast in connections or pressuring somebody, you very well could be evoking through who you're being this kind of behavior from other people, where the cost of them confronting you with the truth, there's just not enough of a relationship there for them to put that ante in. So they just exit. And that's not to shift blame. That's not to say, hey, you're to blame for these things, but it is to say, how do we put the power back in your lap?
Yeah.
And so that you can actually examine, if you have a reoccurring experience in your life, rather than sitting in the place of feeling like a victim, how can you move into the realm of just inquiring about it as a possible creator of the situation and using what the world is giving you as feedback as a way to examine and take stock of how you're showing up and what are you doing that might actually be creating this kind of behavior in other people.
Yeah.
Not because it's the truth, but just as an invitation for you to step more into agency empowerment.
Yeah. That's great. There's two kind of new expressions in a sense that I'm hearing in this session. So one is, could you be breadcrumbing yourself? Right. This is like to breadcrumb oneself. I've never heard it as what would that be? Like a reflexive verb. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
But then also, how could you be creating breadcrumbing? And not from a place of blame, but from a place of, this could be an enlightening inquiry from you so that you can actually take more power back and basically get more of what you want, which is probably, consistency or connection or the truth or some combination of them. So super like that. I'm just going to cut quickly over here. Thanks for all of you who have made comments. If you're joining us live, give us a hello, give us a comment. We are going to be answering a few questions here shortly, so get your questions in. And if you're watching after the event, also shout us out with a comment, and I will get to all of them. This is live at the moment. I'm talking with Clayton Olson. We're talking about breadcrumbing and ghosting and how to have less of them in your life. So please, if you had an experience of this, hit us up. share it in the comments. We'd love to know what's going on. So just before I get into the questions over there, is there anything else that you want to add on this topic that we haven't touched in on thus far?
Yeah, I think there's something that we can throw in the mix as well, throw in the cauldron of what we're talking about, which is, what are some reasons that people might breadcrumb or ghost? And what we just touched on is, in some ways, inviting people to take a honest look at themselves of how they might be creating, allowing, consenting to this type of behavior in their life. That's one way, which doesn't mean that you are to blame. It just means to take a look and notice where you are reinforcing this kind of behavior. But I think it might also be important just to talk about, like, what might people be going through who are doing this type of behavior, like breadcrumbing or ghosting. Like, Jack, do you believe that it's always a malicious thing? That it's always somebody?
No, I don't.
Okay. What do you think might be going on?
I invite people to be curious about that, because in a sense, as you were talking there, I was just thinking, I use this expression drop-off guy. Yeah. Right. So, sort of the graph of like, hey, whatever this is, whether this is texting each other or going on dates, and then suddenly there's a palpable sort of objective reality that things have dropped off from his side. But like, you could call it drop-off guy, or you could call it I'm being breadcrumbed. Right. And in many ways, they're the same thing, but from two like different perspectives. One is sort of like a him problem, right? He dropped off, and I might be impacted, and it might be super painful, or it might be annoying or frustrating, but I'm sort of seeing it as like, that's over there with him, versus I'm being breadcrumbed is probably, is personalizing it more. And it's more that it's like happening to me. Right. So it would be easy for being breadcrumbed to go, if we're not careful, into a more life happens to me, I'm feeling a victim of something mindset, rather than like, oh, what's up with that dude? Like, he dropped off, like sort of like shame on him, or like, what a douche, or like, oh, I hope he's all right, or I wonder if he does this all the time, or I'm glad he revealed his colors, or I'd rather we got to that place quicker than slower. So there's lots of other like reframes you could put in there. I wouldn't assume it's malicious unless you know that it is. And one of the dangers there, I talk about subjectification, right? Imagining that someone does something for the same reasons that you do. Yeah. So nice. if you ghosted someone, it might, because let's say you are quite a relator, a people person or whatever, it might be very sort of definitive that you did that. Like, you would be actively deciding, not like it skipped your mind, or you might be deciding, yeah, I'm choosing to try and hurt this person by kind of cutting them off. That might not be true for someone else, right? It might be that the best they can do right now is drop off. It might not be that they set the whole thing up so that they could cast you away, right? That seems like a very bizarre use of energy, right? It's not to say there might not be some guys that have that strategy, but I'm going to imagine that mostly it's like there's some level of, what's the opposite of breadcrumbing is like sustained interest. Right. So for someone to stay in contact, there's got to be sustained interest, whether that's, romantic, sexual, intellectual, partnership material, whatever it is, and that there's some minimum threshold through time that's not being met. And so there can be something authentic about that person letting a connection go, even if there could be a preference that they communicate that, particularly if you've connected through time. But it is almost one way of revealing a truth. And it might be that the person doing it could learn to be more available for the impact of that. Yeah. But it might not be that they're actually definitively doing it maliciously, particularly if you haven't really had a strong connection. The people that I feel most compassion for is it like, yeah, we definitely have had a connection because we've been hanging out multiple times, weeks, months, and then just one day, like the rug pulling kind of analogy, like just suddenly, like, yeah, like, did he get hit by a bus? Did he get like taken by aliens? Did he get conscripted by the army? Or did he just decide not to communicate? And if so, like, why would someone suddenly go from they're into it to like such a sociably sort of obnoxious, punitive behavior? Yeah. You're bringing something up where I think I get really activated when I'm working with clients, is when the ghosting happens into the relationship where there's already been an expression of feelings, they've been intimate, there's been some consistency, and then all of a sudden there's no returning of phone calls, there's no explanation of what happened.
I've walked with some clients through the pain of that, and it is so excruciating and so messed up. Where when there's like maybe some ghosting or some breadcrumbing or something that happens in the beginning phases of a relationship before somebody really gets kind of bought in, where it's like you don't even have enough data to determine whether this person's really being congruent. This is just how they might be. They might be drop-off guy. But like when all of a sudden they're loving, committed, and then they turn into drop-off guy. Oh man, I mean, that is so damn painful. And you know, I think for anybody, I was thinking about making a video for men at some point, just giving some men some strategies of like how to communicate their experience and feelings, because I don't think that guys really get by the way, and this is not just men. This is a people problem. This truly is. I've worked with men who have had this happen with women as well. But I don't think that people truly get the actual pain that they can cause to someone's psyche, and how many months that it can just leave this open loop of where the person can't stop thinking about them. I mean, it's really a horrific experience for some.
Yeah, no, I hear it. Well, I think without sounding dramatic, it's a bit like a person dying, but you don't know why, right? And you'll see this if you know, I'm sure people here watch true crime, right? It's really devastating for families. Like obviously it's devastating if they like lose a loved one who gets murdered, but like to have them murdered and to not know what happened, why it happened, where the body is. It's like people can't get closure ever.
Whether they're alive or not. Yeah. Whether they are trapped somewhere. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a similar mechanism of like, it's an extreme grief mechanism, because there's no real way to like know, like, how do I close from this? So I agree with you. I think collectively finding better ways to be available for that, you know, again, I don't know why I'm using like sort of judicial metaphors today, but that's why they have, you know, witnesses read impact statements, right? To say like, this is the actual impact, like you killed my sister and this is what actually happened to me. And that might be the first time that person, and maybe that person's a sociopath and they can't hear it. But I think sometimes it actually is impactful for that person to get like, this is what happened. And in a sense, if the person just ghosts and never gets back in contact, they don't have to be with the disappointment that decision's creating, even if they have a right to leave, right? Obviously they have their autonomy. I think, you know, let's just say at the moment, because we're talking mostly to women who probably date men, I think guys learning to have the care that, the connection might be over for you, but there is some duty of care to help manage that transition, just a minimal amount.
There's a responsibility. There's a responsibility that men have with opening someone's heart. Yes.
I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's a fine line, because there's some things that you can no longer be available for, or it keeps a kind of, you know, sort of weird relational dynamic in place. Right. But I think to be able to go for a coffee or two and to explore the impact and to not know that you've literally quote died, but there is still some care there. Cause I think it hits the wound of like, I'm not lovable and I'm not enough. And I think that also makes it really hard. Like, wow, this person so little that they don't even take my call. Like, wow.
Yeah. Abandonment as well.
Yeah.
And I think it does require who's ever coming back into the fold to have a conversation around this, where you're letting someone down transparently and easily, or let's say gracefully. It requires that person to have a certain level of personal boundaries as well. So that they're not feeling like they're getting sucked into and now trying to actually fix and heal and coddle the person because of something they caused. It actually requires someone to go in, be transparent and vulnerable, but also maintain a certain level of distance so that they can be rooted in their truth and not get sucked back into something that's ultimately not in line with them.
Yeah. Or to not, it's like, you can't also be the healer confidant. Like someone else has to be there for that person. But I think we're quite a long way from that in the ghosting scenario. My imagination is that as much as it probably isn't always malicious. So it could be malicious. It could be unconscious, right? Like I'm just not aware that like there's going to be a huge impact over there. It could also be that the person's experiencing shame and they don't really know what to do with that, right? They know that it's not great that they've just dropped off the world. And they don't really know what to do with that. So rather than even maybe say like, I've got a lot of shame and sorry, that they just don't even communicate anything about it and sort of like check out from the conversation. And if you think of any kind of relationship, intimate or otherwise, as sort of like some kind of scales. The thing is, if one person just sort of checks out like, oh, it didn't even matter to me, and it's possible it didn't matter to them, but maybe it did a little bit. It's like all the impact is left with the other person, right? It's like one person takes 0 and the other person takes close to 100. So it's like, then it's not even 50-50 of you're sometimes dealing with just all of what's left in the relationship dynamic. And I think that makes it hard for people as well. So, props and compassion if you've gone through that.
Yep.
How you feeling about taking a question, Clay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to scroll back up here. Thanks for everyone that's saying hello. Welcome. We've got Susan, Colleen, LG, Tara, Ina. And this first question got thrown in by Gina in London. Do you agree that ghosting is basically childish behavior? When in the past guys have dumped me by just blanking or ignoring me, it's always made me feel that I've been dating a kid. Ghosting seems cruel and cowardly. Is it childish?
I think that there are more adult ways to handle the ending of a relationship. And I think that in general, again, I think it's context dependent. I think it really is context dependent. I think in general, there's just better ways of being more vulnerable, transparent, and in dialogue in a way where you're maybe at least not taking the easy way out, and you're showing some level of respect and appreciation for whatever it is that you've created prior to that moment with that person.
I like that.
I'm skating around unequivocally calling it childish and naming it that, because what I don't want to, I don't want this to turn into a, like, we're running around with like pitchforks going after ghosters, because I think that it actually disempowers us to do that. To put too much blame over there and not to look at ourselves as to how we may be participating in it. And so I don't want to close that cabin. Totally.
The other thing that could be possible, right, is that anytime we're labeling something as childish in like transactional analysis terms, it might be that that's inviting our critical parent. And so that we're sort of stuck in one perspective and we're kind of trying to, infantilize what's in front of us. So I think it's a little, I think we should be really mindful before we just label stuff as childish. I would be curious, when you're labeling something as childish, what is the actual experience you're having, right? Which might be like, I'm angry, right? Like, I'm angry because headline, you're behaving like a child. And maybe we want to start there and make sure that your experience is included, and that we're not jumping over your experience just in kind of looking and labeling on the other person. All right. Thanks for that question. Ina says, conversations, any serious topics like boundaries, expectations, needs are absolutely futile on dating platforms. People there are low investment mainly. Interesting. Let's see if we've got another question here. I think we've got one from Colleen. I'm jumping over the comments, but thank you for them. Welcome, Christina in Switzerland. All right. Question from Colleen. Let me see if I can. Would you suggest to still be friends with a guy that doesn't want exclusive long-term relationship? Do you think it would keep me from meeting my person? Could it be an emotional energy waster? It's a good question.
Yeah. So Colleen, I think it all depends on you, and it depends on your boundaries. If you really want an exclusive long-term relationship with this guy and he does not want it with you, I think it's really important for you to be honest with yourself of, are you in the connection with him authentically, being true to yourself, or is the friendship a Trojan horse so that you can get closer and then try to transform it, convince him, get him to see you differently? Because if you're doing that, then you are manipulating yourself in this. And that is a dangerous game to play with a guy, especially if he's being honest with you, because then if you end up turning into a Trojan horse and trying to get closer to him, then you're playing with fire with yourself in many ways. But if you can be true friends with, like, if you respect the guy's character and you can genuinely say, I'm okay with this never turning into a long-term relationship. In fact, this guy actually has qualities that I would like as a friend, and I can properly put him in the category of friend and leave the field open for other people to come into my life, then I think that you do have a possibility of transitioning that relationship. But this all comes down to, there's nothing objective here. It's all about you. Like if you find yourself putting too much expectation or emotional energy into this and not getting anything in return, then it is an energy waster. And you might have to actually experiment with that to find out.
Yeah, I like it. The thing that was loudest from what you said there for me was can you keep your field open? Like that's maybe the definitive test, that if this is actually limiting your field or your energy, your desire to go out and find what you're looking for, that may be a point of reflection. Yeah. The other thing is there may be an honest conversation that says, okay, well, look, you've been clear with me where you stand, right? I'm being clear with you. I do want a long-term relationship that's exclusive. In the meantime, it might be that it's okay for us to connect as friends or lovers or some mix of the two. But I'm also going to be clear back to you, mister, that if I meet someone I'm serious about, I might not be able to hang out with you as much, right? So my honesty back to you is I might need to downshift our connection in the future if I'm actually investing much more in a connection that can go somewhere. So maybe that's also the empowering perspective from your side is you are naming what you need and see and being honest about you're basically saying, if there's such a time where I consider this is an emotional drain, I'm actually just going to be honest with you and let you know. Is that okay? So there's sort of clarity coming in from both sides.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. All right. How much is mental health a factor in ghosting and breadcrumbing, especially with men who are over 40?
Well, I guess I'm curious about the motivation of that question. Yeah, I'm curious as to
what would give you to know the answer to that.
Exactly. Yeah. What will having that answer do for you?
So I'm going to imagine, and I might be wrong, and LG, tell me that maybe, let's say you've had the experience that you've been dealing with ghosters and breadcrumbers, and then it was clarified for you hypothetically that was actually you were dealing with something that was a mental health issue. That it might actually allow you to feel more okay or have more compassion for the other person and take it a little less personally. In the same way that if someone's got a mental illness who's walking by you and they swear at you, you might take it less personally than someone who doesn't have a mental illness.
Yeah. On the counter side of that, something that I'm tracking here too is
she says I cut them more slack if they have grief or depression, etc.
Yeah. Okay, great. And I guess if we're making a generalization around men over 40 and mental health being more of an issue too, I think it's more empowering. Like if you're living with that as a belief and you're going out in the world and you're like, wow, there's a lot of men with mental health issues that are going to be breadcrumbing and ghosting. And that actually causes you to be looking for that kind of behavior proactively, or feeling discouraged about being able to find a potential partner, then I think that can be a disempowering lens to come from. I think it's great to be able to spot the warning signs of maybe some inconsistent behavior that pops up. But if we're in a place where we're looking for it and we're expecting it, that doesn't actually serve us in being the most flexible, resourceful creator of our relationships.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And it looks like there was another question here too. How to determine a person with a tendency for breadcrumbing at an early stage of dating, breadcrumbing or ghosting at an early stage of dating. I've got a couple ideas on that, but I'm curious do you want to take a shot at that first?
So, I think there's two scenarios here, right? So the one scenario, which is probably the easier one, is that it does get revealed in the early stage of dating, right? Which means if you were able to put your interests and feelings aside, perhaps if let's say you're mostly texting and you kind of handed your phone to an objective friend, that they might sort of say, oh, he seems kind of slow in responding to you, right? Or like it used to be that, you guys would text every few days and now it's like once a month. So there's like definitively been some kind of drop off. I don't know if it serves you to need to know at like a very early stage of dating, because I've sometimes seen that the sort of psychology that goes with like a need to weed out all the breadcrumbs very quickly. It's a kind of hypervigilance that I think ends up not really serving you, and I tend to use the metaphor. I used to have a business mentor that was a very serious business person and investor. And he used to have the view like, I'll take a meeting with pretty much anyone. So I don't need to be like super like filtered on the front end, but I'll also just be businesslike. And if there's nothing there, I'll just tell them that and we kind of move on. So it's not being afraid to waste like a little bit of time, because I think that ends up having you in a weird, I've seen people have like algorithms for how they deal with people, or like, I send him this text and I send him that text, and then I put him on a phone call and then we do a thing. And I call it like the sausage machine. And I'm not a big fan of the sausage machine. I'm more like, presence and intuition and noticing and tracking. But I think maybe where the harder part of this question is the guy that we were talking about, where he's actually pretty consistent and looks like he's really interested. And then there's a drop off at like 3 months or 6 months or some point where there's been genuine investment from both sides of the equation. I don't know definitively how you track that. I do know it can be helpful to not subjectify the other person's investment strategy, which means not to imagine that their investment strategy in dating is the same as yours. There are some people that are high investment until they're not. And that's what's often confusing. And that is both men and women. But again, in this situation, we're mostly talking to women that date men. So there are some guys, I use the sort of analogy of a business deal, right? Like that we might be super into it. We're going over all the books. Looks like we're moving forward. But then eventually in that last day of audit, we find something that's a problem and the guy backs out of the deal, right? A bit like, Musk was trying to back out of the Twitter deal. It's like, I don't know if you can predict that on the front end. I think you might just want to be mindful that just because you're seeing a lot of high investment, don't make it mean that the person is definitely into the committed relationship until you've both heard it from them multiple times. And perhaps you have the sort of the evidence that's also backing that up, right? So I think once you start to get through 3, 6, 9 months, it could still happen. It has happened. I've seen it, but I think it's super rare to the point where it might not be worth worrying about it. And I think just continually to check in with someone and to check in any assumptions like, oh, I noticed you introduced me to your family. What does that mean to you? Right? For some people, that is a high investment behavior. I don't introduce people to my mom because she's going to think, is this the one? Right? For other people, they're like, oh my gosh, I've introduced my mom to like so many people over the years. It's just like a friend, right? It's super social. Doesn't mean a lot to them. So check it out, right? If they invite you on vacation, is that a big deal? Or is that actually kind of cash? So anything that you're investing meaning in that you haven't heard from them multiple times, this is important and meaningful to me. I wouldn't be making that assumption. I think that's your best bet for not ending up, what I would say, building a castle in the sky, right? Which is a sort of more of an idea in your head than it was definitively the other person's reality. What do you think? You got a couple ideas? I want 3. Come on.
Well, I want to comment on what you said first, because I think it's, I feel like I'm loving the way you're thinking about it. And feel like you're expanding my my repertoire of distinctions here. And I'm almost like going back to Gary Chapman's like love languages.
Yes.
Like there could be another one of like investment languages.
Yes.
Where it's like your investment language might look very different than his investment language. And I think that is a great example of the one of like taking a trip with somebody. Some people that really means something significant. It's like, wow, we're spending money together. We're going out in this container. We're spending all this intensive time. Yeah. I personally have friends that have done that with women that they barely know, as just this is how they love to enjoy life. Yeah. So it is really good to check in. And I like what you're saying around being able to have the courage to ask questions in kind of a socially calibrated way where you're giving the person a chance to reveal a little bit more about the intention behind the action rather than judging the action directly. I think that's great. So if I was just to come in, and so first of all, I think that's a valid approach. And I think I'll come in on the other angle of maybe giving some things that maybe are like universal. And you can tell me if you think that these kind of land. So I'd say that one of them is like inconsistent communication. So if a guy is like inconsistently communicating with you and where there's these long periods of silence and he's not really getting back to you in a timely manner, and there's just a big difference between your responsiveness and his responsiveness, I think that's something to pay attention to. Is that a definite red flag? Maybe not, but I think it's definitely, it's like there's a tremor in the water of like, okay, like this kind of behavior, if this is happening now while we're actually on good terms, what happens if things go kind of sideways? What does that turn into? What does that volumize into? And it could be ghosting. I think another one is like non-committal language, or being very vague about the future, very vague about what our plans are, very vague about just the person revealing their inner territory. I don't think that this thing by itself means that, again, the relationship is over, but it's another data point to track, because there's a lack of clarity there. And then what happens again when all of a sudden things get a little tense or go sideways, or he finds something that he doesn't like? Does that non-committal, vague language suddenly turn into clarity? Probably not. Like it actually just might continue to go into this evaporative kind of cloud of communication that becomes even more unclear. I think if there's a disinterest in deepening the relationship, that's also another sign. So if there is a lack of progression in the relationship, and you're noticing that you're having this feeling of wanting to move things forward, and it's not that he's going slowly, because going slowly is one thing, but it's almost like that he's consistently got these strategies to de-escalate things on a regular basis.
Right.
I think that's something to pay attention to, and possibly, well, definitely to have a conversation about, as especially if you start to get more invested in it.
Yeah.
And all of these things, I think, are kind of like the stems that then can blossom into breadcrumbing, or there's already breadcrumbing present, or blossom into ghosting.
Yeah, it's an interesting metaphor. It's like, oh, blossoming, it sounds great. And you're like blossoming into bread.
No, these are poison flowers. These are poisonous flowers. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that's all well said. And maybe the last piece I just say on, I'm not sure if the best use of attention is, how can I kind of weed out or avoid the ghosters and breadcrumbers? I might encourage a restatement of what's your vision? Like, what do you really want? And how do you magnetize to that, right? So how do you get good at tracking high investment behaviors, right? Or escalating interest, or consistency through time, or words and actions that align, or just your own ability to ask and be frank when you need to be, like, hey, I'm kind of looking for something serious. No worries if you're not, but are you? Do you see me in that way? Any clues? So kind of focusing more on the action that gets you the thing you want, right? Like if Clayton came to me and said, he wants to start a new business. And I said, well, you've got to be careful because there's so many scammers out there, right? It's going to be hard for him to get that business it's hard to get a business off the ground, right? It's hard to get a relationship off the ground if your focus is just on who's trying to screw me, right? So be wise, be smart, be street smart. But actually, you've got to keep your eye, I think, on what you most want, because there's so much noise out there, which is partly, what we're discovering with this kind of misery of choice, plethora of options, the whole world, in a sense, democratizing possibly through online dating, but also it's it's the challenges of postmodernism. There's just so much of everything all the time and all these different silos that it makes it hard for people. So, yeah. All right. We're going to be wrapping up here. So if you have a question, this is the time. I'm just going to rapid fire through these here quickly. And if you're just joining us, I'm here live with fellow coach and friend Clayton Olson. We're talking about no more breadcrumbing and ghosting in 2023. And we are taking a few questions here. And if you're watching this after the event, leave us a comment, let us know, and I will get to it. I've got a question here. Am I right in thinking that sleeping with a guy early on to somehow keep him interested is a recipe for disaster, but that I may as well get something from him if he plans to ghost me anyway?
Woo!
Some dark arts there.
That is, so Gina, thank you for asking. And there's loaded into that question. Am I right in thinking that sleeping with a guy early on to somehow keep him interested is a recipe for disaster?
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
But that I may as well get something from him if he plans to ghost me anyway. So I don't think any guy, truly, I think it's a very small percentage of men plan to ghost. Like they're premeditative ghosters, just like, I'm going to meet some women, I'm just going to ghost them. Yes, they are out there. But if that's what you're looking for, and you're creating a way of being when you're dating where that's the suspicion consistently, there's going to be a way in which you're bringing a discounted version of yourself to the table. Because what I would encourage one to have in this situation is that you are so damn valuable, and your value is so far beyond anything that you could offer sexually. Your value is in your perspective of the world. Your value is in the life that you live, the wisdom that you've accumulated, the things and challenges that you've overcome, and that if a man really wants to get close to you, what a gift. Because the level of support, the level of reflection, the level of devotion that's going to be possible in a relationship is something that is going to be undeniable. That's the perspective I would encourage one to stand in, and then go out and date. And that way, you're not discounting yourself thinking, okay, well, maybe, sex is the only thing that is going to keep them interested. And I might as well just go ahead and get that because the guy's going to leave me anyway. There's a compromised way of being that is manifesting that question. So rather than addressing that question directly, go to the core of it and say, and maybe this is the question to ask yourself, Gina, I would love for you to list out what are 15 reasons why it would be absolutely in the best interest of any man that wants to play the game of relationship to be with you. What is it that you bring to the table that is absolutely unique and special? What is it that you have to give as a bright, lovely human being? I mean, Gina, I know you have an amazing sense of humor, so absolutely add that one to the list, right? But like, get a list, bring this all into your conscious awareness so that you are infused with an acknowledgement and a knowing of the value you provide and all the dimensions of it. Because as you become more in contact with that, that actually unconsciously gets translated to the right men as well. And I think you'll waste less time in relationships that won't work. And you actually might end up easily magnetizing the ones that are of people that are going to see that in you.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Jack?
I like that. I love it. It's great. I think everyone should do that right now. I mean, finish watching with us, but then once you've done that, go grab that list. And it could be a never ending list, right? If you don't come up with 15 right now, just come up with 3 and just add to it, through the course of the coming days and weeks as things pop up for you. The essence of that, it's almost like this is the risk is it would become transactional here, right? So it's sort of like, if I think someone's about to mug me, I don't say, oh, well, I'll just nick his iPhone before he nicks mine. It's like, that's not the way I want to engage in the world. So even if you think a guy is sort of coming in and looking at you in some transactional way, kind of don't stoop to it.
Yes. Nice.
Practice owning, this isn't the game I want to play with you. Like, it's like, you're sat in the pub having a drink. Someone comes up and wants to fight with you. Do you have to fight them? I mean, that's a choice, right? You might just say, I don't want to engage. I'm good. It's been good. Thanks. Or if you were going to do that, maybe my challenge for you would to be incredibly authentic and just say to him, I fear that you're going to ghost me. And before you do, I want to have transactional sex with you. And I want to check that that's okay. That's honest, right? Now, he may not be a yes to that. He may be, but then at least you're kind of owning, like, if you want men to be real and honest with you, then don't treat them transactionally, own what you're actually about. There is maybe a place where you could do something casually, but I'm saying that a little bit like provocatively, but then at least you're in a bit more resonance with what's happening for you.
Yeah. And if you're not in England, you don't have to say transactional. You can say casual.
Am I making up words here? Jeez.
No, I love it. It's just very,
I don't know. I was on the phone the other day with some guys I went to high school with, and then suddenly one of them says, Jack, we've got to address the elephant in the room. And I'm like, oh, what's that then? He's like, what the hell happened to your accent, buddy? So it's like, look, this is the new me. It's authentic. I'm not trying to call it
the transatlantic.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
I should say transatlantic, but I would have a habit to drop those T's now. All right, great content. Thank you both. I think there's one last question. I've heard it's a good idea to present on the second or third date to ask to talk about what your goals are for the long term. Do you think this scares me away? Do you think it scares me away?
Scares men away?
Oh, men away. Yeah, let's go with
that. My
that.
imagination is she dropped an N.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. So it could, but if it were to, you'd want it to. Meaning, if talking about that, the guy's like, look, I'm really not interested, then we know probably he's really not interested. Now, if he's somewhere in the middle of like, yeah, maybe I could see something with you, it's not clear to me, he's probably not going to be freaked out by that conversation, right? But I would invite you to notice from a more, a lesser place of protocol and a bit more a place of, attunement, intuition, noticing where the connection is. If it sort of feels that it's the flow of where it is, to bring that conversation up, right? Rather than sort of being too formulaic, like, oh, it's the second date, I've got to like present that conversation in a specific way. Because there might also be a little bit of timing to that conversation, right? Or even for you to notice, am I even interested in that after the second or third date, right? Like, where do you actually stand? If you put it too much just over there with him, is he interested in the long term? Let's also make sure that you're connected with your unfolding truth vis-a-vis him, which might be the long-term interest, or it actually might not be. So I'm a little less a fan of the formula and a bit more of the fan of the authentic unfolding. What do you think about that, Clayton?
Yeah. My 2 cents. So the idea of somebody asking me about my long-term goals dating, I don't know if that would reveal what you're actually looking for, because there are points where if I'm not emotionally available, which have happened absolutely in the past, coming through breakups and not being recovered, but still wanting connection with people. Somebody asked me my long-term dating goal, I'm going to say marriage and children, but that doesn't mean that's where I'm at right now in this phase of dating. So perhaps a question that might get to the heart of the matter a little bit more closely is just to ask, what is it that you're wanting from dating these days, right? Or what is it? Another thing too could be, and this is one that I threw on Instagram, but what is it that you feel like you're learning about yourself through dating right now? And that question can reveal a lot, because it actually will reveal the person's orientation towards this period in their life right now. Yeah. And if they're in a place of casual fun, like, they're probably not going to answer that question in depth, right? But if they're in a place where they're really understanding what's at stake and the potential of a relationship is on the docket for them, you might find that there's a flavor of depth and transparency and honesty that question reveals. So I would try that one out.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I think Clayton's distinguishing the fact that many men might identify that long term they think of themselves as good partner material, right? And that they want a committed relationship. But it takes, I think, an unusual level of awareness sometimes to be able to notice, right now, I'm not available for that because, I'm on the rebound or I'm doing something else. So I would even own that personally in the past. I don't know that I've been the best at being able to distinguish that. So I like that you're coming at it from a few different angles, right? So you don't just hear the guy like, oh yeah, long-term he wants a relationship, and you assume that he's available for that. There's also, the hard part of relationship, right, is the personal and the impersonal. Impersonally, a guy may want something more serious. Whether that's going to be true in this connection with you, right, is a very different question. So it is good to know, impersonally to you, what's he actually available for. But then really where the rubber hits the road is, how does he orient to you, right? And sometimes a guy isn't in a super serious phase, but he meets someone that actually activates his seriousness. And he's sort of like, oh, I thought I was going to, be super focused on, I don't know, traveling the world or doing something. But actually, I'm willing to change some of that right now because this has a serious energy to it. So, yeah. All right. Well, we're just past the top of the hour here. I realize there's a couple of things we didn't get to here, but I want to appreciate you all for your comments and contributions and questions. If you're watching this after the event, put your question under the video. I'll get to it. If you have a question we didn't get to, you can also just post that under the video once this is put up. Clayton, thanks for being here, man. Super appreciate your insights. It's been good to riff with you. Yeah. Any final thought as we put a wrap on this conversation today? We will do this again, obviously, at some point. Where are you at?
Yeah, I think I'm appreciating the different ways that we approached, just from a number of different angles, to look at this phenomenon of breadcrumbing and ghosting. And I feel like I learned some really cool perspectives that you opened up and brought to the table. And I don't think we've had this conversation before. So I'm just acknowledging, that I've expanded my map in this conversation. It's been super enjoyable. And thank you for everybody that has played along, asked some questions, and got some value from this video.
Yeah, right on.
It's awesome to be here and serve.
Yeah, very good. If you're liking what Clayton's putting down, check out, I'll link his channel under here. Check out his work. He's got a ton of really great content online, also available, I think, taking on some one-to-one coaching clients. Is that right?
Yeah, I am.
So
Yeah.
Check that out. Reach out to him if you want to talk more, and give this video a like. And as always, Jack, thanks for being here. Thanks, Clay. Thanks, everyone. We'll be here again soon. All right. Take care, everyone.